Greetings, everybody, and thank you for joining our Plant Records webinar series. It's been a bit of a break from our webinars, but we're really happy to sort of have a new session going here, which we have titled How to Kickstart Your Inventory. So I'm Howard Osgaard, the Director of Botanical Solutions at Species 360, and together with me, we have Dr. Wahid Arsad.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see some new faces and looking forward to sharing some of our thoughts and hearing from you today on kickstarting your inventory.
Yes, so the motivation behind this webinar was, well, hopefully that comes clear through the session, but there was a conversation we had with one garden a couple of months ago when they said, you know, what do we do now? We have a garden with plant records being stale for years. How do we approach that? And I thought that's probably a sort of a challenge that many have in different gardens. Some people may start from scratch. Some people have sort of half-baked records, if you like. So today we're going to go through some of these ideas that other people have shared with us, and then have a bit of a discussion. And hopefully, at the end of this session, we all come out with feeling slightly more enlightened about this particular topic. So we have set up this as a sort of a slide deck where you can take part and give your, we're going to do one little word cloud. So if you wouldn't mind either scanning this code, or there is also a link in the chat that will bring you to the same slide deck that we have here now. And then you can follow the session, but also share your thoughts on that one sort of questionnaire or word cloud that we're going to bring up quite soon. So I will let this stand for another minute or so that make sure that people are. So what you should see is basically the same slide as I have here on your smartphone or on your desktop. If you have problems with this, just give us a hands up or put something in the chat. In general, we want people to participate. So if you have any questions during the session, please just post them on the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to address that straight away. Okay, I assume people are already in. That's great. Thank you so much. So we're going to sort of, first of all, quickly, we're going to talk a bit about why do we do inventory. For many, this is for the converted, let's say, that's quite an obvious question, you might say. But I think we want you to reflect a bit more about the importance of having up-to-date records. And then we're going to dip into 3 different case studies. So we have the Dawes Arboretum in the United States, and Utrecht University Botanic Garden in the Netherlands, and Tohono Chul in the US, all 3 of them sharing their experiences and perspective. And then at the end, we will talk a bit more about these, well, summarize the thoughts. And then we'll also have a bit of a demo from Wahid, who's going to show us a bit on how we approach this in Hortis. And throughout, as I say, if you have questions, please participate. Okay, so now we're going to go for a bit of a word cloud. So I want you all to think in sort of carefully, what are the biggest challenges you have faced in your institution when it comes to inventory or inventorying your plant records? We would just want to sort of give this as a backdrop, and maybe it's got to give you a fuzzy feeling of not being alone. I don't know, but so if you can in this word cloud put in a few words that you feel summarize your situation in your garden. What are the biggest challenges which we managed to misspell, which I hope you forgive us. It was my mistake here. There's no spell checker on this one in particular. Sorry about that. Okay, so when the first one posts up, we get some, here we go. These are, time is a really good classic, and cost and knowledge. Large number. Oh, that means large number of records or large number of plants. That's a bit of a.
Or it could mean a large number of challenges.
That could also be the case. Yeah, yeah. If anybody wants to add a bit of context to what they posted, that would be great as well. I'm just thinking it. Scattered records. Yeah. Oh, does that mean the records on different sort of several spreadsheets, piece of a paper, and those kind of things? And many season specific. Could that be dormancy? I know that certain things are, you can't do inventory, especially in the northern hemisphere when it's, if you're far up north and it's snow, of course. Aerial view is not good enough, maybe. I'm gonna, that's great. The knowledge part is also interesting, whether that's knowledge about plant or horticultural, sort of being able to identify plants or whatever. IT reluctance, yeah. These are good call. Time is often coming here, and I think of many of these things are tricky, but I think there's two aspects here. Is the organizational, the way you work, the way the composition of your staff and their experience and those things. But then there's also the technology, and of course, from a technological perspective, our aim is to help you. And with the time, people say we can't give you more time. We can't give you more than 24 hours, but we can make those hours you spend more efficient. So in some indirect way, we can give you more time if we do this right. I'm just fishing to see if there's anybody who wants to elaborate on any of these, but that's okay if you don't. I think just to IT reluctance, I'm guessing that might be sort of the sort of dynamics of getting a new system approved by IT department. Those kind of things can often cause a bit of delays. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's really helpful. We will see if we can pick up some of these during this discussion as well. Aerial view is probably the relation to maps as well, or that's a scenario if you use maps from Google and Bing, where the satellite sort of happened to take a imagery of your garden 3 years ago, and that was during a wedding, and you're not happy with it. So there's solutions to that. But okay, thank you so much. That's great. So we drew this diagram this morning because we're trying to sort of figure out how to express the importance of inventory. And as far as the way we see it is that there are like 4 corners of what you could describe as healthy plant records. And we sort of came up with the term inventory gap. So that's the difference between your plant records and the collection in sort of real time. So a plant will, let's say, perish in the garden, and you don't notice that. So that's a gap. And then if as time goes by, the gap becomes bigger and bigger. So you want to keep that gap as short or small as possible. If it becomes too big, you end up not relying on your records anymore. And that's sort of, and then of the whole purpose, all the investment you've made so far also becomes slightly reduced, or the value of that investment. So it's a bit of a critical thing, really. The other 3 things is the taxonomy part is basically making sure that you're using correct scientific names. And by that, first of all, that they're spelled correctly, etc., so that you can use this in a data sharing context, etc. And again, if your taxonomy is completely not correct, then again, you can't use your records it diminishes the usefulness of your records. In the bottom left corner, provenance. Here we talk about provenance in the broader context of where did you get the plants from? And this is particularly important for wild collected material, where you might have plants in your collection or material in your collection that has research or conservation potential. But if you manage to lose the information about where it was collected, what's the location it was collected in, for example, then you lose the value of that part, and then the plant sort of suddenly become less valuable. And the last part, which is that many struggle with for good reasons, is plant identification. You might think it is such and so species, but it might require a specialist to clarify that. So how good is your plant identification? And all those four things combined will sort of decide or inform or let's say define how healthy your plant records are. Some of these things are practical, but we think still, why did we talk about this? Well, you can have all these other three correct or at high standard, but if your inventory gap is huge, then you can't rely on it anyway. So it's very much probably for us, I think the most fundamental one. And that's also why what we've focused on, a lot of the gardens we work with today are gardens with a big inventory gap. And we want to help them to get that gap smaller so they can then focus on the other parts of the collection as well, and make the plant records more useful to inform their mission. Okay. So a few other things to consider is I'll go straight to point 3 here, where the records, if they're accessible to staff and researchers, etc., you will get more use of the records, and it's sort of like a self-auditing thing. You can imagine if you have all this in machinery to keep your and workflows to keep your records super up to date, but it's not used by anybody. That's a big contrast to it being used daily by different people on the staff. So that helps you to sort of give you a sort of like a payback, you might say, or sort of a loop on the effort you made into the system. The integration with digital mapping and GIS is very helpful, and then of course being able to share the data. That again is the same as the other one with accessibility. So if you can then establish naming conventions, that helps people to understand how they do things, and then training as well is really important. So now we're going to jump over to a few examples from Utrecht University Botanic Garden, Dawes Arboretum, and from Tohono Chul in Arizona. But first, start with Greg Payton, who's going to share his experience and ideas about how they operate at the fantastic Arboretum in Ohio. If you haven't been there, you should. So Greg.
Yeah, thanks for the first opportunity to embarrass myself. So I will go first. I'm Greg Payton, Director of Living Collections at the Dawes Arboretum, fancy title for Plant Nerd, but just basically the head of the department that oversees collections of living plants. We have, which also includes our herbarium. So they were once living plants, now they are preserved. Yeah, so I've been here since 1996, so quite a while, and have come from next to nothing in terms of a database. We had computerized plant records, but basically a flat file DOS spreadsheet system to a modern software package, and have gone from paper inventories to computerized inventories. Now using offline data so it can be accessed in the field. But just a brief overview and summary of shortages and things like that and things we watch for. We evaluate based on at the present time we have a status date of the last time a plant was observed, and based on sorting those dates and then in collaboration with the location code of where the plants are located, we determine where the most plants are that have the oldest status dates. So we can then create a list of locations to visit, and we inspect every plant within one of those site locations. Now we have the Arboretum broken down. We have a total land holding. I don't have it in hectares, but almost 2,000 acres. So it's quite a large block of land. And then our collection areas are on a segment of that is about 500 acres. So it's 17,000 plants in our collection, 6,000 taxa of woody trees and shrubs primarily. That's our focus being an arboretum, but so we have to break that down into garden areas. There you go, 800 rough acres roughly. I mean hectares, but anyway, so we break that down into garden areas. So we'll have like our conifer collection, flowering trees, flowering shrubs, some other garden sections, and then those are further broken down into quadrants, which are basically 100 feet squares, and then all the plants are located into one of those squares for the database location code, and then we can pull up those squares that have those grid cells that have the oldest inventory dates and go through every plant, adjusting its label, marking it if it needs a new label made. And one of the key things that I tell people is, it's best to have staff that can recognize at least the basics of a plant. If you're looking for one conifer in this cell and there's only one in there, you can easily key in, that's the one I'm looking for. You recognize a maple over a flowering tree of some variety or something, and then just do some very basic assessment of verification of species. If you know what sugar maple looks like, Acer saccharum, you can feel certain that that plant is the one you're looking for. But again, all of our plants are mapped as well. So we're looking at a map with the locations of where the plants are supposed to be in a graphical representation, so we can see where that plant is supposed to be. But one of the other keys to proper inventory is looking for what you don't see on the map. So you're looking, you have 15 plants in this square, you're looking for, keeping a mental note about that plant at that site wasn't on my map. Why is it there? So finding things that are a surprise, either volunteered on their own, or maybe they were a plant that was removed in the past that has regenerated, other factors like that. So one of the shortcomings I wish we had in our present software package was the ability to note when one of those locations last had a full inventory. So basically tracking the activity dates of locations. This could be further expanded to, you could add like a lawn area as a location and the last time it received whatever kind of treatment. Beds could be noted the last time they were mulched, or have basically a status tracking for areas, not just the plants. So that would be a great feature that I'd like to see.
that's great. Thank you, Greg. So yeah, no, I love the idea of looking at, as you point out, I think many people replicate that model of inventorying a bed at a time, and of course keeping track of when did you last do that bed, etc. Even though the idea of obviously having a track of which plants have last been visited is helpful to inform you where to go next, it's still yeah, it's a multi-dimensional kind of story. So that's really cool. Yeah, 800 hectares. I don't know how that sounds like a challenge to roam around there on foot, or do you have a little scooter, I suppose?
Yeah, we have various sorts of vehicles we travel around on. So
yeah, not helicopter yet, but
yeah, southern part of our country.
yeah. I think on this call, so the motivation of starting this, having this session as well was a common question we had from a few gardens who said, where they completely, sort of starting from, no, they have half-baked records basically. How do you approach that if you have records that have been in dormant for years, and then what's the best idea? But I think we can have a general discussion about that afterwards as well, see if that's, maybe we'll hand over to Martin, who is more not an arboretum, so then you get the two sides represented here. No, I'm just joking. But
yeah, we're slightly smaller. We're just under 10 hectares in Utrecht. And actually, I've been working at quite a few gardens before starting here, so my experience has been quite varied. Yeah, we're quite fortunate that we have quite a rich data set of plant records going back, and it's been a digital at least since the 1980s, and before that as well. And we actually at a point where we looking into using things like OCR and other data sort of technology tools to actually get some of our sort of records that are at this moment in time just sort of stuck in the paper age, and using technology to bring that to life again, because we believe that if you can track your institutional history, that can also tell you. So even historic records are of value. But I'm currently in a situation where I'm extremely fortunate that I have 3 other curators working with me, which gives a little bit more breathing room to think of these sorts of things. But I've worked in gardens where there was no records whatsoever, which is kind of sometimes really good, because then you start with a clean slate and you can just sort of work with what's in front of you and link your records to your mission or vision, or and you can think clearly about what you want to do and start from scratch. Is actually not a bad place to be. But like what Harvard mentioned, half-baked records, that can be quite a challenge. And I've also worked in a botanical garden where for at least 15 plus years there was no record keeping. What do you do then? And in the case of that garden, it was even a case that accession numbers were lost on labels. They started just printing name tags for plants and losing accession numbers. So I think it's sort of a question of what you want to do, what your resources are. But I'm a big believer in just getting your inventory up to date, and that's what working with what's in front of you and making sure that you have a realistic view of what you have in the garden. So in the case of half-baked records, that might mean sort of just accessioning plants if they don't have labels, and linking it back to historic records at a latest point in time. Yeah, I mean, we've also started using, if you can, at some point in time, there's also sorts of other tools that can speed up inventories. Things like barcoding, we're using that especially in our nursery sections. We're now thinking about bringing that into our gardens as well. And I tend to work with a model where I sort of use the same sort of, we also look at garden sections and look at when last it was inventoried. But I try and work with the models where I can also bring in volunteers to map plants and do inventories. And one of the things we do is firstly going around with the colleagues in the garden that really know their plants, so the horticultural staff, and let them get on with their work. And then I normally use a mobile device after we've made sure that everything is labeled and barcoded and whatever. A volunteer then comes and can put stuff on the map and mark things as alive and so on. But then you do it bed by bed, section by section, and even a volunteer with little or no plant knowledge can do some of those tasks and help you speed up the process. But that's about sort of my experience, and I'll be keen to hear what other people have experienced here as well. Yeah, so my experience has been quite varied, but yeah, I don't know if this is helpful.
No, it is. I think for many, demystifying this is helpful. And one thing I wanted to ask, well, everybody really, the scenario of seeing a plant where the label is gone, and it's in the system somewhere. And I can imagine, I'm now guessing that it would be helpful to be able to record that the plant is alive and somehow manage to resolve that later.
I can start. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, we have a system where we can take our records out into the field on tablets, and I can enter in one of the names of the grid cells that I'm looking for plants in, and it pulls up a list of only the plants that are located within that grid cell, and then view a map where it shows their locations. And I can, even if there's a plant that's there that isn't on the current live records, I can go back into plants that were previously living in that location, look for dead plants, and see if that happens to match something that may have been in that site. We try to have a very strict system of how plants are added and what records are done on those plants to ensure that they're in the system before they even get put in the soil. So they need to be accessioned and labeled before they're added. But so we feel pretty confident in knowing whether something is supposed to be there or not. But that's one of the techniques we use to ensure that. But you know, with our GPS mapping, you know, we can get plants mapped down sub, you know, like in a decimeter or a better accuracy. So it's, you know, very certain that it should be where it is.
Yep, yeah, you're in quite a good state, I think, in that respect. Martin?
Yeah, I was just I was looking at one of the comments that came up in the chat, and I really have I've been in a similar position. And I think coming to that particular question, and I think in a question like that, I guess if the last notes were from 1967, a lot of those labels will probably be either gone or in a really terrible state or not there at all. I mean, I think there's two ways in which you can go about this. And this wasn't available a couple of years back when I had the same issue, but things like and I don't know what sort of capacities you have in your organization, but things like OCR and those sorts of technology, even recognizing handwriting, has improved markedly over the last years. So there could be an option to try and at least using for those who optical character recognition to sort of at least get text and to be able to search. To make these documents searchable, which is already a massive help. So in theory, you can find a plant in the garden, you can go back to your document and you can potentially search, and at least not having to pile through all, because some of these old collection books can be like Bibles, actually, especially if you've got decades worth of data in there. So that could be one way of doing it if you want to really link it initially. But my experience in the past have told that it's pretty good just to get a proper name on it as far as possible, and then at a later stage to link it back with the data. And one of the gardens I worked, the last records were from 1998. So we used basically the year 1999 as a year that basically indicated that this plant was basically found. So it could occur anywhere between 1999 and actually 2013 when we started using records again. And then at some point in time, you might be lucky, you might be able to link it with an old accession number, and then you can update your records and add the information. But it's so important to have a, I mean, it's a living collection and it changes all the time. And Dave was saying a little bit earlier that it's really important to have a realistic and up-to-date sort of inventory of what's actually really in your garden, because without that, a lot of other things aren't possible.
Yep. Okay, that's really helpful. And then we will then move over to Arizona and Tohono Chul.
Hi there, guys.
Hello.
As far as it's going, just kind of listening to everyone's problems and what they've kind of gone through. I think a big problem that Tohono Chul had was an inventory gap. Times record keeping were the same, spreadsheets or on paper. So I think now we don't have a plant collection. We've had records, but they're not up to date, they're inaccurate. So right now we're still kind of trying to basically start somewhat of plant collection, just trying to just trying to know what's even out there in the property. So we've had a big inventory gap. We had a outdated plant list actually added to Hortis before we started actually going out there and surveying and mapping. So that was not a good idea. It really threw us off just because a lot of those plants were linked to different gardens. And we went ahead and also renamed a lot of our gardens. So now we have 51 gardens that we're currently surveying and mapping. And so a lot of those plants that were, added on before we're just not there when we went out and started surveying, or they belong to different gardens, which really kind of threw us off. So there's a lot of cleanup that currently we're kind of doing right now. We're going back and noticing that we have a lot to kind of clean up from that past list and just kind of, start. It's just, there is a lot of plants that are not actually found there or not located in those gardens, kind of what they mentioned before. At one point they were just making tags and putting them out there without even having the plants even out there. They were just getting them made. So we are doing a lot of cleanup right now, just going back and really, reassessing what's out there. And just trying to get more like accurate numbers before we continue on. We've run into a few hiccups. Same with the aerial view. What was on Bing it's not an updated aerial view of the park since we've undergone some renovations. So that was a little tricky trying to drop pins on. We couldn't really see the garden. So it was a little tricky, but we found ways to get around it. But a lot of it has just been kind of problem solving and trying to use Hortis as much as we can to problem solve and fix these issues.
Yeah. And you had quite a few people involved. You sort of put a small army of volunteers in action, I understand.
Yes, I have. Yes, we are. We have 16 different teams of volunteers. We have field experts, which are the ones that are the more tech savvy, which are actually working with the iPads. And then we have our plant experts who are IDing and, not helping the field experts navigate and get the accurate taxa on there. So it's been a little hard to navigating like a big, you know, such a big team. So that's another thing. Sometimes, you know, having a lot of people in a project could eventually lead more room for error, you know? So that's something we're starting to come across as well.
Yeah, that's, I mean, people make mistakes regardless.
Exactly.
So I mean, on that note, so we're going to talk a bit more about that, but with Hortis, you have the full inventory or the full audit log. Does that help you in that way? Sort of to sort of feel like that I know it's a bit of a leading question, obviously, but one of the things feedback we've had from others is that if people make mistakes, it's very transparent. So
Yeah.
you can sort of basically undo the mistake because you see what's happened and what it changed from to what and so forth.
Yes, definitely. It's been easy to fix those mistakes. That's a good thing, is that you can easily spot them right away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's really great. I mean, it's a wonderful story. So if you had to do this again, as in sort of, was there anything you learned? I want to hear what went really well, but also what didn't go so well. If you care to share that, you don't need to.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish we would have started with a clean slate. You know, I would have preferred to just go in and just, you know, instead of pre-uploading that list, maybe we could have just pre-uploaded like a plant list, not necessarily linked it to the gardens, and that would have helped a lot better. So honestly, I would have just started with a clean slate, and I think we would have, I think if that would have been perfectly fine. Something I did do that I did notice is that Hortis doesn't really have like a section where you can put down like the growth habit of the plant. So kind of what we're using Hortis for too is to kind of extract numbers and data and kind of see how many trees we have, how many shrubs, whether it's native or non-native. So what I use is I use the tags to kind of, you know, set down to you, identify their growth habit basically. So I have tree tags, vine tags, you know, shrubs, are they native or non-native? Because we don't really, Hortis doesn't have that option. So I'm using tags a little different, and I'm using it so when I go back and I need to extract data, I can just, you know, filter out only tree tags and it'll pull up all the trees we have. So that's a cool way that I've kind of learned to navigate Hortis to kind of obtain what I need as far as it goes for like extracting data from it.
Yep. Well, the tags on taxonomy will come very likely before the end of May, so it's coming very soon now.
Awesome, good to know that.
Yep. Okay, that's really great. Thank you so much for sharing. I don't know, Wahid, do you want to add anything? You've
yeah, no, it's really interesting. Thanks, Juliana. That's really interesting. And for anybody else who wants to read a sort of fuller story at Tohono Chul, we had a little blog post with Jamie, the executive director there, sharing a bit more detail about their processes. It's really a great read. And if you're in Arizona, do definitely visit. But I'm going to come back onto the topic of technology, because it's really interesting to hear that you were able to get so many people involved in the garden. You know, that's where the data happens, and that's where we, at least with Hortis, want to try and encourage you know, you to make those changes in the field. So we'll come back onto that story very shortly.
Yep. Okay. So then we sort of created this little flow chart, if you like, to things to consider when you want to kickstart your inventory. And I think I very much agree with what you said regarding starting from scratch. I think that's often people have if they see a spreadsheet that somebody put together 15 years ago or something, it feels like there's some value there. There is, but maybe not as a basis for a plant record. Sometimes it's quicker and easier to start from scratch. So keep that in mind. Now, clear objectives. So I think number one, if your institution, you have a mission. There's a reason why you record this this data, or maybe you don't think about that too much and you record anything that springs to mind, or people might do that. So it's very, very important to have a thought about why you record information and what it's going to be used for. And that sort of links up to the next one of having a sort of a almost like a record keeping policy. That sounds very sort of tedious and formal, but it could be as simple as saying, you know, the key information we want to record is this, that, and the other, and nothing else. That helps you to sort of keep focus. And then when you start the collection, then you want to standardize your data conventions, and then you should also then find a regime of doing regular audits in and inventories in your collection. So there are some mechanisms in Hortis, for example, to help you there, but it depends on what kind of collection you have, of course. Like we heard with Greg and Dawes Arboretum, with the long-lived woody specimens, you might not want to see them every year. You can check them a bit less at a lower frequency, etc. And then when you have all these things in place, training and talking to staff and get them to be on board with all this is very important. And then you carry on improving this process as you go on. So and then if you do this, it's a bit like changing sheets every week and whatever, those things. It feels less of a burden after you've then got it onto the filling the dishwasher, whatever. All these kind of household chores, they are also sometimes a challenge, but then when you get it on autopilot, it will run very smoothly. I don't know if you had to add anything, Wade, on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to add something about the last point there, the continuous improvement. So I think one thing that we want to encourage is for gardens to embrace this cyclical nature. So, you know, seek feedback from your stakeholders, you know, look at how your metrics are performing. You know, are they meeting the criteria of your mission? You know, are you fulfilling your goals as a botanic garden? And, you know, if you're not, then, you know, think about where you can adapt your inventory processes as required to help you, you know, keep on top of some of these things. And all of those are sort of key components of this cyclical process.
Yep, wonderful. So we're going to also talk a bit about Hortis and how we approach this. Some of you may have seen Hortis and used Hortis a bit. Hortis is, as I mentioned earlier, our motivation for Hortis it has many angles to it, but what we really want to do primarily now is to make it easy for gardens to keep their inventory up to date, and by making it a product that runs on any device, that helps quite a bit. So it's designed to work smoothly on mobile and on desktop equally, and the fact that it's on a cloud service also makes it very straightforward. You don't need to install anything. You could just go into your dedicated URL. So if your garden is called Tohono Chul, tohonochul.hortis.com, and then you can log in and get going straight away. So I was thinking about this IT reluctance comment earlier on. Most IT staff are super happy when we come along because there's no work for them really. Hortis just works, and then the last thing I think also, which was exemplified with Juliana's example here, where having a product that's designed to be used, sort of have a low threshold. A lot of people use plant records, use it on a very occasional basis. So if you've been on, you know how the feeling is if you've been away for 3 weeks and you come back from holiday or something, and you start using something, you think, oh, how does this work again? And that's what we want to avoid. We want it to be easy and smooth so you can just get going and be productive. And then if all these things, if your records are up to date, then it's more reliable. And then you can actually use your records for much more than just having something to show to sort of your peers at the end of the year or something. So that's what we want to do. We want to help you to get to that point. I also wanted to, before we start, I wanted to add that element that we mentioned that we have, which is quite unique in this context of plant record systems. So Hortis has a very powerful capability, which is called immutability or audit log. There's another term, longitudinality, which is a very fancy word, which comes from medicine, which sort of talks about monitoring a certain thing over a period of time. And with Hortis, when you make a new record and you change it, we keep the old one in its full form. So we have a full copy of every record as it's been going through. And by doing so, we create a time machine for you. And that can be very useful and give you comfort in terms of if you're afraid of making changes, etc. Wahid will show you a few examples of how that works. There's a few things we already have. We have the audit trail, we have soft delete. So in Hortis, you don't delete anything, you just archive it. So you don't need to be afraid of clicking delete. It will be there. And then a few other things we will come with further down the line, like draft approval and collection analytics. But we think it's a really helpful thing for people who start with plant records, in that they should feel safe and unafraid to get going. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Wahid, who's going to give us a quick demo here.
Thank you, Havard. Yeah, so just conscious of time, so I'll keep this fairly brief, but we wanted to talk about some of the ways that we've been working, with you, thanks to your feedback, we're making that inventorying process hopefully easier week by week. And one of the things that I wanted to share was related to this activity log, this concept of longitudinality and having a full audit log of what's going on. So here, this is the dashboard that many of you will have seen already as you log in. And here you can already see the activity going on in your garden. So if you're, got 30 volunteers, you can see what changes have been made and to which record. So it's a very powerful tool, as your collection evolves in real time. You can sit here watching all the activity as it happens. But in the case of inventory, we're just going to have a quick look at the map. Now, the mapping dimension is very powerful in the context of plant records, especially when it comes to inventorying. So as an example, I'm just going to zoom in and take a look at these beds here, which is kind of the focus of my inventory today. And if I click a particular record, for example, this Myrtus, I get to see the full information, including any activity that's taken place on that record. And just as an example, you might want to add an observation to this Myrtus. And doing that is very easy. You hit observation, and here you can see that it's actually overdue a yearly follow-up. And that's because in Hortis, you can specify when you last observed it. So for example, I last observed it today. Today is the day of my inventory for this particular bed. And I can also specify the condition. So if it's in excellent condition, I may be less interested in following up so frequently. And that might be the case with some of your, let's say, longer lived woody specimens. But if it's something that's a bit more sickly, it's diseased and, it's in poor condition, for example, you might want to specify a weekly follow-up or even a monthly one. So when you specify your follow-up period, and if you're overdue that, you'll get a warning. As you can see in this case, it's overdue. So it's a very easy way to, get started and submit observations as part of your work. And you can see, as we mentioned earlier, the changes that have been made by myself and the time as well. So there's full transparency there. When it also comes to marking things as dead as well, that's also a key part of, doing your processes, because we see, we've heard a lot of gardens have beds and lists of plants that, may not be there. So for example, I'm just going to have a look at this clematis, and actually this clematis has actually died. So how can I make amends? Again, when you view that record and hit edit, you have the full, list of different statuses. So actually I'm going to mark this one as absent. And I'm also going to just put that it's diseased and likely perished as a result. So when I save those changes, that plant has now been marked as absent. And when I go back to the map, it's actually going to disappear completely. And that's a good way of, following up with some of your beds and marking things as dead, which is also a valuable part of deaccessioning as well in your collection. The other thing I'm going to show you just before I finish is that all of these workflows are just as easy, hopefully, on any device. So our designer, we've really thought very carefully and listened to a lot of the struggles that gardens have. So our product works on any device as long as you have a browser, and all of the workflows are hopefully just as easy. And simply moving plants is also an effective way of doing an inventory. So I'm going to take this Ocotea, for example, and I've noticed that it's actually in slightly the wrong position. So I want to move it. And if I update the position, I can then move the map, and it's actually over here. And when I confirm that change, the coordinates are updated in the database. The activity log has also been updated and stored, and away you go. So we are going to continually improve this and make it as optimal as possible. And that's where your feedback really plays a big part. I've also noticed that this is overdue a yearly follow-up, so I better get onto that as well.
Maybe also add that last thing here, Wahid, the filtering of the maps, because you saw that the plant that had died disappeared, but obviously you can say, I want to see all the dead ones, I want to see all the plants of a certain bed or whatever. So you can all this is of course available in when you look at the collection from a list perspective, but from an inventory situation, I think the sort of filtering and using the map as a starting point is quite powerful. That's really cool. Okay, so Juliana, just out of curiosity, you said you used iPads, and did you have a mix, or was it primarily bigger sort of sized monitor, sort of tablets, or also smartphones?
We used both. So I had interns use their cell phone, and I had volunteers use tablets, Windows tablets.
Okay, cool.
I believe it's a lot easier with the phone as far as it goes for dropping GIS points than it is with the tablet, but I think that's just due to the Wi-Fi.
Oh yeah. So you mean as in the
dropping the pin, the
yeah.
pin. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because they have they go over cellular and the other only for Wi-Fi maybe, or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's really great. Okay. So the question here of Hortis can be used on iPads. Yeah. So the beauty with Hortis is that because it's a web app, it works on any device that can run a browser. Going geeking out slightly, it's actually a progressive web app, so you can even though it runs in a browser, you can install it as an icon on your desktop and run it as a separate sort of that it feels and behaves exactly like an app as well. So it's a sort of best of both worlds, really. So yeah, we are very what should I say? It runs on anything. So to round things off, making sure I don't know if there's any questions further down here now in the group, but obviously we will. I think we're going to crank up our sort of sequence on our webinars a bit more now again, and so if you haven't subscribed, do so at hortis.com, and You've probably seen the latest improvements. We launched some enhanced taxonomy 2 days ago, and the dashboard that Wahid showed. I think all these things will just keep on going with new improvements. Well, I don't know the frequency. Sometimes it's once a week, or sometimes more often. And that's another benefit of being a cloud-based product, that when we roll out a version of Hortis, that takes us about 10 minutes or less, and that goes to all the users of all our gardens, which are now on 5 continents. So that's really, really cool. If you're coming to the American Public Garden Association, then I hope to see you there. Me and Wahid will go there, and also Jim Günther, who is the CEO of Species 60. So hope you can come there. And then if there's not any other questions, we're gonna check and for the audience to see if there's any other questions they want to catch up on. If not, we wish you a wonderful. Oh, here's a question. I think I can hear some.
Yeah, I was just going to type it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So our garden is quite treed, so we have a lot of cover. So how do you start getting a map when you can't really go to Google Earth or anything like that to start getting a map of the garden to get started?
Yeah, so currently with Hortis, we deliver it integrated with Bing Maps and with OpenStreetMap, and so that's the first starting point. We'll come with some more advanced options later on this year, but at that point, so our recommendation is that if you look at a satellite map of your garden, there are some of those bigger specimens that you probably recognize from above, and you start mapping those, and then you can switch between that and OpenStreetMap, and then you get those bigger specimens as reference points for then the other plants. So it depends very much. Certain regions have better satellite maps than others, etc. But I think at some point, getting very likely the most cost-effective way to get a good map might be to get a drone map made for you yourself, and then we should be able to integrate that in Hortis at some point later this year. The timing of a drone map is of course important, so that you do it at a point where the canopy is more or less very light, or not early spring, or early, depending on where you are in the if you're in the southern hemisphere, early autumn, just before
we have a lot of conifers. So that's...
Oh, of course, yeah. There you go. That's more of a different challenge then. Yeah, so you then obviously at some point, if you really want to have good maps, you want to maybe consider getting some. You can use OpenStreetMap to update the map there, to build up. So you basically build up structures and reference points, so you can map from them, and then eventually you will recognize the patterns of the garden. But eventually also you can consider making your own map, of course. But that's a bit more more of an investment.
Sorry, could you clarify? Did you say office street maps?
No, sorry, I meant sort of. Oh yeah, open street maps.
Open street maps. Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do, I think very soon, we're gonna create a short little video on how to update and change your own OpenStreetMap, because that's a bit like Wikipedia, where anybody can go in and make changes, and it's really great, and it's not as fancy as the more commercial map products, but it's at least very accessible and cost effective. So we'll make a recording of that reasonably soon, and we've been talking about that for a bit, and that will give you some helpers on how to get started on that.
That would be very helpful.
If you feel like it, please send me or Wahid an email, or fill in a form on the website, and we can follow up a bit more closely on how you can get there. So
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, that's great. I think we're about 1 minute left of the full hour, but checking if there's any other further questions. Okay, well, I think thank you so much for joining this 16th of May, and sign up to our webinar now, or sort of subscribe to our newsletter, and then we'll stay in touch. And if you want to trial or anything else, also check out on our website.